there's so many aspects to Magic that I want to explore, and whether that continues to be just being a high-level tournament grinder versus approaching it in other ways that let me manage my time differently. I have this recognition from doing well in tournaments, and that is really inspiring, but I no longer feel like that's a central motivator for me. I feel like I'm just going to use that platform to explore these other ideas that have been floating in my head. When you get to a certain point, you're no longer trying to make the best play on the board every turn. You have to be able to ask yourself a question. Like, if this happens, if my opponent makes their best play next turn, and I make this follow-up, then what happens? Being able to ask yourself these questions is something that, I've spent a lot of time training for myself, also helping others work through that. Like, where you're in-game, you don't know what's important. Understanding how to ask yourself a question to figure out what to prioritize is something that I would say I pride myself in adjusting to and improving at. That's super important.
Welcome to Humans of Magic. My guest this week is Nathan Steuer, reigning Magic World Champion. Nathan is turning 21 years old this year, but has a Magic resume that many of us could only dream of. So, how did he do it? That's what we're here to find out. Nathan tells us how he made the leap, breaking the glass ceiling from Magic Grinder to Magic World Champ. We also chat about translating Magic skills to other disciplines, and some of the influences that have profoundly changed his life trajectory. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this level up conversation with Nathan Steuer. All right, today on Humans of Magic, I am here with Nathan Steuer. Nathan, how are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to do our podcast together, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Must be a little challenging for you today because I think you just played a whole day of Magic Online. Is that right?
Yes, I played a Magic Online sealed PTQ starting at 7 this morning, but luckily I was able to meet you later in the day.
Yeah. So how often do you still play Magic Online? Is it just all the time? Are you always trying to qualify for certain things, or?
So, in general, I've been toning down how much I play outside of testing. But the one thing that I really do enjoy doing is trying to qualify for these MOCSs on Magic Online, which is just their 3 times a year sort of high-level showcase tournament. And so I played this tournament because it was the first qualifier of the season, and really I'm interested in playing in it for the qualifier points that you get for making top 8. So I reached my goal by making top 8 today and losing. I just wanted to get some points and get an early lead at the start of the season.
Oh, well, congrats on the top 8. It sounds like you made quite a deep run today, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you have a decent sealed pool? Like, how did things go overall? Like, were there any particular interesting highlights or anything?
Yeah. So my pool was quite strong in this format in Brothers War Limited. One thing I've noticed that I think my deck did quite well is I had a really good plan for the late game. I had this Portal of Phyrexia card, which carried me in a lot of my games, and that artifact made the opponent kind of have a hard time in any late game situation where I drew it. And I ended up having to fight back. I thought my pool was quite strong, but I lost round 2. It was pretty early in the morning. I figured if I take another loss, I'll hit the gym and stop playing Magic for the rest of the day. But I just kept on winning, and I had some really close matches in round 6 through 9, and then I lost the quarterfinals, and I was quite happy with that.
Are you generally pretty good at hitting an early loss and then kind of mentally bouncing back from it? Are you basically unfazed at this point, or?
Yeah, I mean, I would say one thing that keeps my head in the game is knowing that the difference between 1 loss and 2 losses is the tournament. That's fine, but when I sign up for it, I'm not even thinking about when I take my losses, really. I'm trying to think about specifically, if I can survive, and that's kind of the name of the game in these tournaments. You just have to be willing to stick it out. Sometimes you lose round 1 of the event and you don't want to play anymore, and that's fine, but I try my best to bounce back because I've had a lot of runs that have been successful after losing the first round, and so my track record has indicated that I should probably try my best even when I'm in a not-so-great situation early on.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing I do know from playing a little bit of Magic Online is that like you always run into some great players. I think that's also like the real excitement of like MOCS or qualifying or even playing like challenges for a certain format is that like you're always running into, I would say, like probably the best of the best, right? I mean, you're definitely one of the best, but it's like you also get reps against a lot of top competition and the same grinders are the same names, right? Maybe not like always like PT echelon, but like you're always running into some pretty solid players all around, right?
Right. I mean, the average level of competition is quite high. And so, for me at least, early rounds of an event, maybe sometimes you don't play against the strongest players, but pretty consistently, I would say you play against, if I played 9 rounds in the Swiss of the tournament, I would say 5 out of the 9 opponents were definitely good adversaries and put up a fight that was difficult. So I always like playing the Magical 9 events just because I feel like it's good practice.
Yeah. And you mentioned getting into the top 8 today, and you did get some points, but when you get into the top 8 of a tournament, are you just like trying to win the whole thing? Are you like happy to be there? Like, what's your mindset like when you get to that stage?
My mindset is pretty close to the only prize that I'm trying to go for is first in a lot of tournaments.
Yeah.
And there are some exceptions. For example, in this tournament, since I'm already qualified for the regional championship that it feeds, I am less interested in, once I make the quarterfinals, I know that the stakes are a lot more significant for the opponents, and I can empathize with, my opponent really wants to win this match, I assume. And so losing in the quarterfinals to me didn't really feel so bad because of that. But in general, if I'm playing and there's a really high stakes qualification on the line, I'm always thinking, well, I might as well like try to get first. And so my track record in top 8s has also been pretty good, just trying to close out tournaments in general. And I think that's a big contrast to a lot of players who, once they make top 8, maybe they don't try as hard or they've lost a lot of steam. But I don't really let myself relax until after the tournament's over. Yeah.
Yeah. And I especially with paper tournaments, like there's always the opportunity to draw or to split, I should say. Is that something that you tend to avoid doing, like when it comes to those opportunities? 'Cause you want to win it all, or does it depend on the situation?
Yeah, I mean, I would say in general, I'm pretty willing to split if I feel like my equity is similar to the opponent's. Like, I treat Magic as a job, and I have for like the past year or two, and so my goal is just to bring in a consistent amount of money doing so, and sometimes that works out, and other times I end up making less than I could have otherwise, but I would say I'm pretty willing to split whenever the opportunity presents itself, barring lower stakes, like in a Pro Tour qualifier or a challenge or something else. I don't really mind playing for everything, because if I lose, I don't think I'd be super disappointed or anything.
Okay. You have a very measured approach to approaching Magic as a profession, which I love. So we'll definitely get into more of that. But one thing I just want to ask you about, what do you do between rounds? Like, I know that for me, it's just like I do get impatient, like waiting between rounds and like waiting for something to happen, especially when a round finishes and you win or lose quickly. And it's just like there's so much waiting, right? I guess, which is pretty typical for Magic tournaments. But what do you do to like pass the time? Like, are you reviewing? Are you just like doing something entirely different, or what is it?
I try to find some ways of distracting myself, so I try to do non-Magic things, I would say, in between rounds. Usually I'll talk with friends, so I'll message a buddy and be like, do you want to talk? I just finished my round. And that's a fun thing to do if both of us are still in the tournament. And so that's a common thing where, 3 or 4 people on my team or in a group are in the tournament. And so we'll all have a hub on Discord or somewhere else to talk. And the other thing I would say is I often will spend some time writing just my own thoughts, and sometimes that's correlated to Magic, other times not. But I like writing, and I like just watching videos and trying to decompress. I mean, if you're spending all of your mental energy thinking about everything in the game that just took place, I think it can come at a pretty big toll, as like near the end of the tournament, it's really draining. So while I do end up spending time inadvertently doing that, I've tried to minimize that and find good outlets that mostly just are ways to entertain myself as well as making sure that I'm rejuvenating, like drinking water, using the bathroom, the normal things you want to do between rounds.
Yeah, for sure. What are some of the things that you've been writing on, like between magic rounds? I guess there's like the writing you do in
Yeah.
general, but there's also like writing maybe like in private, not publishing it. So like what kinds of writing are you doing when you're playing Magic or thinking or in between Magic?
I mean, sometimes like when I'm writing about Magic in between rounds, a lot of the material is like analysis of a format. So like I'll take notes on like, in this game, this card overperformed or underperformed, and just like figuring out how cards work early on in a set is really important, particularly when you're doing something like a sealed event like I did today. I took some notes in between rounds because I know in a few weeks there's going to be a MOCS Open tournament, and I don't play as many games these days when it comes to, like limited and drafting and sealed events. And so when I do have the opportunity to do so, I find that that's usually the best time to gather some more data. Otherwise, when I'm not writing about Magic, in between rounds today, I was doing some reflections on the year and basically just winding down and writing what came to mind. I find it kind of like a more peaceful process than always thinking about Magic the whole time when you're in a tournament.
Yeah. Let's get into it. Like, I know it's almost towards the end of the year, so this almost serves as a kind of 2022 retrospective. Like, what are some of the... I mean, obviously there's Magic stuff, but we can talk about the non-Magic stuff too. Like, what are some things that have really... what are some highlights for you, basically?
Yeah, let me share some of the notes I was working on today, actually.
Yeah.
I was kind of reflecting on some of the big accomplishments I felt this year and sort of how to phrase that and let that out, because it's something I wanted to share for a little while. And so some of the things that fell into that category were, I was really happy with creating a coaching setup through Medify.com and really feeling like I established myself in that way, especially on top of feeling like it's a really hard skill, and being good at something like Magic does not really correlate with being a good teacher. And so I started about a year ago in last November, and then at some point in June or so, Medify reached out to me, or vice versa. I'm pretty sure they reached out to me, and I started doing coaching for them, and that was really good. The other things are being organized. For me, one of my struggles, and also something that's probably a strength for me in Magic, is I'm really good at being able to accomplish whatever goals I set out for myself. But the hard part for me is getting that down on a page and making sure that my day-to-day things that are kind of monotonous, not necessarily super high-level stuff, are taken care of. And so I think I did a quite good job in my eyes of utilizing note-taking apps and scheduling and trying to shift from the lack of responsibilities that I felt in that department doing school to living a more organized adult life in that way. And so that was really significant for me, and something that it's still ongoing, but I feel really happy with the progress I've made, and hopefully I can continue to work on that.
Yeah. So about the organization part, was there a particular event or events that kind of made you feel like, hey, I need to better organize things around me?
I think it was kind of a natural progression that ramped up when I felt like my time was being stretched thinner than I wanted it to. The big thing was just through writing and reflecting on my own thoughts, I felt like I really struggled at breaking my time into the chunks that I wanted it to. And so spending, an hour on 6 10-minute tasks was really difficult for me, versus I could focus my energy on a few tasks in a day, and that felt like no problem. And shifting what that looked like in terms of, at this time, I'm going to send this email that I want to do, I'm going to pay this bill, I'm going to contact this person, was something that made me feel like I could suddenly begin to take control of that. Otherwise, it felt very chaotic for me. And I think partially that's something that I've dealt with for a while. I've had some ADHD since I was younger, and so managing that and other associated effects of that has just been something that it took a lot of active effort, and I would say creating systems for myself has been the hardest part, and also the most fulfilling when I feel like everything is working. And then staying to a routine in the same vein has felt really important to me.
I've definitely had that phase in my life as well, where I felt the need to better organize my life due to anxiety or stress. Or I'm not saying that you felt the same things, but I definitely felt like I needed to better handle stuff around me, because if I didn't, then I would just feel more stressed. So I had a couple years of actually like listening to podcasts and reading books about systems, and I'm wondering if there's any particular sources of inspiration for you, or did it just all come about through self-reflection, basically?
So the big thing for me was I started reading this year, and in terms of like diving back into that, I think when I was younger, it was something that I loved doing, but with high school and college for a year and everything on top of that, it just kind of fell by the wayside. And so at the start of this year, I read this really inspirational book, almost like a memoir or a set of maybe you'd say platitudes or advice. This book called Introspect by an author, a Singaporean author that I really respect. And I think it really helped me channel some of my energy into things that needed to be accomplished. And a lot of that was just due to me feeling a little lost. Coming back to where I was at the start of this year, I just left college and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And so I think staying grounded by searching for some people with thoughts that I respected was super helpful, and starting to read again was the first step for that.
Can you give me a little bit of a summary for that book, Introspect? Because I've not had the chance to read it. Like, obviously, it sounds like it's something the author went through, but there's some applicable lessons for others, right?
Yeah, I would say the central part of it is the book covers kind of the journey in order to sort of fully unlock some of the things holding you back, take advantage of your own ambition, and work through, I guess, a lot of shortcomings. And it's a lot of more actionable advice than what I was necessarily taking into account. And it really just gives you a lot of tools to reflect. And so, yeah, the material itself was just this author's perspective on ways which he had managed his own stress and anxiety levels, ways in which he had managed being in really, really tough mental states. And for me, that was something that really struck a chord somewhere, and felt like, wow, I'm in the same difficult place, and I really need something that will give me exercises to work on. And so it would give you actionable exercises to work on, almost like a self-help book of some kind. But I don't think I would describe it quite as that, but to me, it did wonders for my mental health. And I think it was kind of just the basis of a set of tools that I needed to start doing that internal work that could eventually turn into a lot of external benefits.
So I'm reading a little bit between the lines here. So let me know if this is right. Can I assume that your stress this year came from deciding to not pursue the academic track and leaving school?
Yeah, I think that was probably the most major contributor for sure. I mean, that was a really tough decision, and I think I went really far against the grain in order to arrive at that.
Yeah. Because I would have to imagine, like, I know we only talked for a little while, and I know of your work, but obviously, like, people who play high-level Magic are fairly intelligent. Maybe there's, like, exceptions, but, like, I'm sure that you seem like a bright person. I'm sure that your friends and family have certain expectations of you, right? Because we live in a society, people have expectations of you. So it's kind of like, I would imagine a lot of it is like, Nathan, why are you off the normal track or whatever it is, right? So maybe describe for me what that's been like, and if the stress is like from within, or it's like a combination of within and also expectations.
Yeah, well, I would say there's a lot of history behind where I ended up today. And I'm also happy to dive in that direction from kind of post-COVID life and dealing with college as well. But the major points, I don't know if you want me to start there, but the major
Yeah,
points,
absolutely. We go as deep as you want. Yeah, absolutely. No problem. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, let's start there. I think it's kind of important backstory. So I grew up in California, and when college came, I got into UC Santa Cruz, and I was really excited about that opportunity. But at the same time, COVID had just hit, and I didn't.
By the way, what program
say,
did you apply to? Like, what undergrad were you pursuing?
Initially, I was pursuing an undergrad psych degree, although since then I've realized that that was not my interest. But that was my initial thought, and so I was going in for a psych degree. And so in the fall of 2020, I made the decision to take online classes, and I moved in with my girlfriend in Washington State, who was going to school there. And so I was doing virtual classes in California while living in Washington. But here was the real big issue. I didn't really have any financial support. And so if I wanted to make that decision, I needed to come up with a plan in order to do so. I had maybe 4 months of rent covered at that point and not much else. And so my decision was, okay, like you play a lot of Magic, you've gotten into Magic Online recently, maybe you'll have to get a job, but let's spend the first month or two seeing how successful you could be in Magic. And I believe the first major finish or two was I did well. I got second in a Mana Traders event, and that gave me a few $1,000s. And once I got that win, it was like, okay, that was October, and that pivotal moment was like, I've been here for a month. I have 3 months of expenses covered now, maybe. And I don't want to look for a job right now. Let's see how far I can go down this. And then in December, I would say the next really important moment was meeting my best friend, Sam Rolfe, who he was sort of the first person that I clicked with in Magic to the point of like, oh, this guy knows what he's doing. Like, he's on the level of like these top pros when I watched him play and talked to them about Magic. And so we
Is
spent...
this Phil Hellmuth on MTG?
Yes. Phil Hellmuth on MTG.
Yeah. Right.
And so he spent a lot of his energy and time talking to me, working on decks with me, and we basically became friends immediately. And our results showed in the first half of 2021. I think we went on to dominate really hard in all the Magic Online challenges and events, and I think I experienced several level ups along the way that were really pivotal. But during the same period, I was still taking classes. I was pretty disengaged, and honestly, I just felt like a complete lack of passion and attachment, given that I was doing things online, and I didn't really know anyone who I was talking to. I was doing the bare minimum, and I was probably spending triple the amount of time playing Magic that I was doing schoolwork, but I was scraping by and passing my classes somehow. Mm-hmm. And so I would say the next point was in May, after a lot of success in the first half of the year playing online. I won what was then the MOCS qualifier, and this was a MOCS Open where the winner goes straight to the MOCS, which happens once per season. There's 2 qualifications from that, and it was kind of a one-off event that was really pivotal for me, honestly. It was a really significant amount of prize money. It was probably the biggest tournament I'd ever had the opportunity to compete in, and doing so was like just a really, really cool experience, especially since it was the first MOCS that they had in the new system. And so I do that event in June, and I finished 4th place out of 8 people, so I was quite happy with that, though still a lot of room for improvement. And then it becomes near the end of the school year, and this is around August of 2021. And so at that point, I end up deciding, okay, I'm going to move back to Santa Cruz and try it for 6 months. And I leave Washington State. And
because you were just so disengaged with like the online class, basically, right? Yeah.
They were like, okay, like you can come for this quarter in person and see. I mean, basically they advertised it like you were going to get the college experience, which I wanted to see it would click with me. And at the same time, I was continuing to perform really well in Magic Online. I worked with a team and had really good, I would say a lot of good success, not necessarily in my results with the team, but just coordinating, making these connections, and leveling up as a result. And this was now known as Team Handshake, I would say. A really, really smart collective of players that I got to know during COVID. And so I made the second MOCS of the year with my buddy Sam, which was a really awesome moment after they introduced the MOCS leaderboard, which is where the top 2 players of the season, given the number of top 8s they get, will make the MOCS. And me and him were number 1 and 2, which was a really cool moment that showcased. Oh,
that's
wow,
so special, because I had known. Sorry to interrupt, but I had known that both of you had gotten there, but I didn't know that you two were such good friends, and like that makes it extra meaningful for sure.
Yeah. And so that was really cool. It was like, whoa, we're number 1 and 2 on this leaderboard. We've been working together and prepping decks together every week for 6 or 8 months at this point, and we just showed that we can put up this consistency that other players aren't putting up right now. And so that was a really special moment. And so now our timeline's like, I'm in September and October of 2021, excuse me. And I decide I'm going to try really hard for this MOCS event. And at the same time, I'm really not engaged with school. I'm on campus and I've made some connections, but I would say most of my time was still spent thinking about Magic. I felt like I was right there, and I wanted this more than anything. And Magic had been the one consistent thing in my life for the past 10 years, I would say, in a lot of ways. I didn't go back that far in the future, but I would say, given how I was feeling and how rough my first quarter was from August to the end of December, I felt like I was making a mistake by staying there. I was still in a long-distance relationship in Washington, and I just made the second MOCS in a row. And then on, I would say, a really strong gut instinct, despite what other people had told me, at the end of December, I decided I had had enough, basically. So I was there in December, and in January, I went to visit my girlfriend in Washington, and I clicked with a lot of her friends there and made really quick connections. And they asked me, her best friend who had an open space in their house asked me to move back to Washington. And so I kind of had to take a leap of faith. I decided, this feels right. I've kind of gotten this far by like doing what feels right and being able to support myself. At times the margins for doing so were really thin, and it stretched me really thin. Like physically it was really exhausting, mentally really taxing, but I kind of felt at the beginning of this year like really lost, and this felt like the thing that I should be doing despite what people were telling me that was in my best interest. And I would say that was a critical thing to identify. It was like, I was 19 at the time. I'm 20. I need to go with my gut, and I need to trust that I'll make the best decisions I can. And if it fails, then what's the worst that can happen? I'll figure it out. I've always figured it out. And yeah, that was the thing that I think I was reading this book that I mentioned, Introspect, at the time in January. And it really dawned on me like that this was the place to go to. I should be in Washington. I wanted to be close with my girlfriend and the people that I had a strong feeling would become a group of friends with me. And so that was a really pivotal point, and I think that's where things have really took off for me at the start of this year, and that was kind of my COVID journey and exploration phase that launched me into certainly the most incredible, fulfilling year of my life this year.
Thank you for sharing that, and I want to also ask about the school part. Like, so you had studied basically the COVID era. Like you had been studying, trying to get a psych degree, right? That's what you were studying. Okay. So was it like the subject matter itself that was not interesting to you, or was it like the subject matter plus the whole institution around it, and like maybe the lack of connection? Like, cause you kind of touched on a couple of things there. And I'm just wondering, like, when you moved to the campus, like what was happening? Was it just like not relating to the other students or to the faculty? Was it like the subject matter you kind of realized like it just was getting more and more uninteresting? Like, what was it for you?
I think it was a pretty strong mishmash of all of those ideas. A big one was I couldn't get into on-campus housing because of how the protocols were set up, and I applied very early to in-campus housing. I didn't get in until after I'd signed a lease, about 4 days before we had to start packing our bags and moving in. And so I lived off campus with a group. I lived with 12 other people in what was a co-op space, and we each had our own rooms. And I didn't really connect super well with that setting, and was far off campus. And being a sophomore, not a freshman on campus, was a pretty big thing, because a lot of people had either already established how they wanted to spend their time or doing something, or they had established friend groups. And so socially, I felt very disconnected. And then when it came to the academics, I would say the subject matter I knew at that point was not right for me. At this point, I have a much stronger interest in finance and business that I've been pursuing this year. And the other thing was, I think partially I was doing a lot of general education requirements at the time, and they all felt to me like they lacked a lot of depth. I felt kind of disengaged, like I wanted to just press a skip button and move to something more interesting.
Or maybe listen to it at 2x or something. Yeah,
exactly. And so that whole combination of things, on top of feeling like I wasn't in the right place for where I wanted to be with my relationship and with magic. Magic was a huge factor, pushed me to make that change. I think beyond like the things that were going on directly related to like why the experience felt so disconnected, I think it's really difficult to focus your energy fully on both categories of school and magic, because they're both very all-consuming things when you're talking about competing at the highest level of something like magic. And I think the stress on top of everything going on was really a lot for me to manage in regard to I knew what I wanted to do, I think, for a little while. I just didn't really have it in me at a certain point to push out the thoughts from others, or I guess the projections of how I should spend my time in regard to magic versus school. And so I think once I became a little more comfortable with myself and embracing that decision, that was the most helpful. Otherwise, I could have easily seen myself having made that decision 6 months earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to just come out and say I'm pretty supportive of what you, not that you need my support, but just thinking out loud, right? You have a chance right now to, well, first of all, I think what you said I totally agree with, is that it's very hard to half-ass two things. Like, you got to go all in on something if you're really passionate about it. And right now, it feels like the time to, quote unquote, take a shot at magic or continue doing what you're doing and play at a high level. And magic is not necessarily something that will always be there. I know people like to say like it's always be there, but it's like when you work yourself to a certain mindset in terms of a game, like it's like when you're at your peak or near your peak, which I assume is the case. I think you want to make that run, because I think college or other pursuits will always be there, especially when you're not as passionate about it. So yeah, that's kind of like a really long way to say I can start to relate to what you're going through, because like a lot of people, their heart tells them that something is correct, but then there's the rational part of their brain attempts to say like, no, you need to just go get a job, go to school, do the safe thing. And it sounds like you have a once in a lifetime opportunity to do something for Magic or continue to do something for Magic. And why not take that chance, right? Because you can always go back to school a few years later, and even being like a 30-year-old freshman is not terrible if that's what you want to do, right?
Yeah. I think I totally agree with that perspective. And at the same time, being in the middle of it and being like, wow, I'm like letting down.
Yeah, it's easy for me to say
people.
because I'm just like, yeah, that's Nathan's life, right? But when you're living it, it's much harder. I get you. Yeah.
Yeah, but after, making this decision not to be results oriented, we try to avoid that. But I think it was for the best and put me in my best position to succeed. Not only on the financial front, where I feel like Magic has been really supportive to living a lifestyle that I want to live, but also just in like in terms of my mental health and kind of taking control of things I want to do. This year has been filled with lots of opportunities that I think Magic bolstered.
Yeah. I also think leaps of faith are good, right? Like, so just so you know, like, I moved from Canada to China to be with my now wife, and it's like I moved literally across the world, and started a job here and things like that. And at the time, like everybody, including myself, thought I was crazy. So it's just like sometimes things work out. I mean, and they don't work out. I think it's kind of like what you said. Like, what's the worst that could happen, right? The worst that could happen is if you can imagine the worst and it's not that bad, then you can do it. Basically, yeah. I think they call it negative visualization. Like, I didn't even know this term until later on, but like for my career and for my life, I've always kind of operated by that principle. So good on you. That's all I'm trying to say. So
yeah, totally.
Yeah. So tell me about this year then. I mean, I will definitely get into the coaching stuff as well, but like just your own personal progress as a Magic player. Like, how did you feel like because 2021 was like you significant level ups and growing as a player. Did you do more of that growth? Did you have more of the growth in this year as well?
Yeah, I mean, as a player, it's a little hard because looking back on it, like, I'm like, okay, every quarter of this year, I won a pretty sizable tournament, and that on its own once a year would have been a huge lifetime accomplishment for me. And so trying to recollect, where things went right and where that turning point came, I think had a lot to do with shifting my priorities, first of all, towards focusing, like we've kind of talked about. But also, I spent a lot less time playing Magic this year, which sounds weird, but I've played a lot less Magic this year than in years past. I've spent a lot more time thinking about Magic, doing like theoretical exercises and finding ways to improve from my losses in Magic. And so one skill that I think I've gotten to a very strong point at is after watching a game, I can almost certainly identify what the 2 or 3 decisions or turns are from both sides that caused a player to lose. And there's almost a sense of foresight that comes when you get to that point where when you're in the moment, I feel like I have the clarity of, well, this could be a turning point in the game now that I've played so many games. And it's kind of like a superpower that unlocked in terms of my board analysis understanding that I think came in part due to being less stressed, but also I don't really play mindless games of Magic anymore, which is a big thing that I think I did in the past and that a lot of players suffer from. I just try to operate very intentionally through all of my important decisions, and I think I've gotten a lot better at the aspect of crafting game plans in Magic. And so those factors on top of feeling like I was around people who cared about me and I could spend my energy prioritizing doing what I like to do and chatting about Magic, felt like it was the most significant part of the level up process. I really think putting a focus on learning from your mistakes in Magic and in other aspects of my life has helped me see that like there's a lot you can do outside of playing the game that can help you improve. And I think, I fully took that in this year with a lot of other healthy habits that have changed for me. So that's been really important.
Is that just from your friends and teammates who you see that they're also being more intentional with Magic? Like, how did that realization or that change in how you approach the game come about?
I think I was frustrated, actually, in the first two Pro Tours of last season, or Mythic, whatever, set championships that they had. I was a little frustrated with my testing process and prep, and I felt like I spent a lot of energy maybe focusing on things that weren't as important. And then I tried to organize once I was out of my situation in December, going into the two events in the first half of the year that would lead to the World's qualification. I tried to organize myself. And I would say, yes, my teammates helped me a lot with that. But I think a big thing on top of that help from teammates was I focused a lot more on being process oriented rather than trying to achieve a certain win or loss. And I don't think I fully took in when I was winning tournaments that was coming as a result of that, but I would say they're probably very strongly correlated. Like, I never went into a tournament thinking, oh, I'm going to win this tournament. I always went in like, I'm going to try my best and perform well, and if I lose games, I need to figure out why I lose games. And when I make a play, I need to justify why I'm making that play. I need to have a reason. Even if it's a bad reason, you have to be able to look back and say, this was the reason I did this thing. And so setting those guidelines, almost internal requirements for myself, gave me a very strong baseline into, how it basically gives you a limitless cap into how you can optimize your Magic technical play. And I think I really embraced some aspects of it.
So it's really like you felt something was lacking, like after the set championships, and you wanted to. I think it's pretty common, right? I mean, just human nature. It's like if you don't do as well as you like in something, you need to like go back to the drawing board. So it sounds like that's what happened for you, right?
Totally. I mean,
yeah.
I spent a lot of time, playing Magic Online in the past 2 years, like we've talked about, and that was kind of my training grounds. And then I performed super well in that environment where I know it well, but shifting that over to Arena and Worlds and all the things feeding Worlds also has been, a really big change because it's very different. I'm still adjusting to it. It's very different to how I think about Magic. I like thinking with, less time controls in terms of if I need to take 4 minutes on a turn or 5 minutes on a turn to think through a decision, I will. And so adjusting to that also took a lot of energy, and I don't think I fully recognized how much that was impacting my results as well, or the process of getting there.
I think it's like a pretty, if I may say, like a pretty common trajectory is like people that have success at the I'll call it the sub set championships, sub MC, sub PT level. They are basically able to just do well by grinding and just by using certain heuristics, and like it sort of caps at a certain level. And then to actually transcend that and to actually become like get to the next level, you actually have to like almost like destroy these mental sacred cows or like these habits. And because like you'll have people that are just like absolutely crushing Magic Online, winning every challenge or whatever, right? And like 5-0ing leagues, like, 10 times in a row. But then it never translates to something beyond that. And it's like, it's because they're so comfortable with the habits that they have. I'm not saying it's bad because maybe they're making a good living or they're very happy doing what they're doing, right? I'm not going to name any names, but there's certain like some very notable Magic Online players that are like that. But then how do you get to the next level? It's like, you kind of have to take a step back before you can take 2 steps forward, right? I think that's a very common trajectory that I see.
Totally. And on top of that, like being able to ask yourself really insightful questions is another significant level up in the same department. Like when you get to a certain point, you're no longer trying to make the best play on the board every turn. You have to be able to ask yourself a question. Like if this happens, if my opponent makes their best play next turn, and I make this follow-up, then what happens? And that's maybe 2 levels, whereas, really high-level grinders will go one layer past that. And being able to ask yourself these questions is something that, I've spent a lot of time training for myself, also helping others work through that. Like where you're in game, you don't know what's important. Understanding how to ask yourself a question to figure out what to prioritize is something that I would say I pride myself in adjusting to and improving at. That's super important.
Those are the qualities that would make you an excellent coach, because like you had said, you need to be able to have a rationale for like what's every play that I make. Like, can I justify it? Maybe in the moment, but also like in retrospect, right? No pun intended, I guess it's retrospect, introspect. But like, how do you work with players? Because I assume that like people who come to you for a coaching request, they're at different skill levels. So it's like, what's a good way for you as a coach to assess like where they're at and how to apply the because they might not be there, right? They might just be like me. I'm just like trying to 5-0 a league or something. Like, how do you customize like that experience for your mentees, so to speak?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. I mean, the first major thing, and I think is like what I felt I've done a pretty good job at, is you need to ask a lot of questions in the first session and hear their thoughts directly. So I almost always will put my first-time clients in a situation where they have to look at a game and explain to me what's going on in the game in their eyes. And I try to make it like a very welcoming place for them to say, like, I don't know what's going on right now. This doesn't make sense to me. But I try to, for one, help them identify specific ways of thinking that they might be dismissing. And so there's a few layers to it, right? Like once you get up to a certain point in Magic, like I think maybe I can arguably be even a better coach where I'm trying to help someone with long-term game plans. I'm trying to help them with these more theoretical, more abstract aspects of Magic that I've worked on myself. And then when it comes to staying grounded and looking at the smaller things, the technical mistakes people are making, having that recognition that there are ways of learning from your losses that I can help share with people is how I help people improve outside of their session. So going into a session, I put a lot of focus on these systems that people can approach and use. I have good exercises that I've worked on, whether it's trying to understand what the opponent's doing, trying to improve your mulliganing and sideboarding practices, or literally just when you're in a game like we've talked about, what should you be thinking about? Those are the main things that I would say I try to help people with. And the first step in that is you need to get a sense of where they're at. And they'll tell you where they're at. Usually it's, honestly, most of the case, it's a little higher or a lot lower than they actually are. Some people are very humble. Other people are like, oh, I think I'm pretty good. Because, I mean, I've been there. I'm like, okay, I think I'm quite a good player. And I watch them play and I'm like, okay, these things need some adjustment for sure.
That's the thing about Magic players in general, right? We all have that kind of irrational confidence or confidence. So, yeah. But overconfidence is dangerous, right? You over-evaluate yourself, and then you end up, what's the saying? Like, not just misplays, but just like you misevaluate the situation, whatever the situation is, right? Sometimes it's not even in game. It's just like there's a lot of things you can misevaluate, and that has a kind of a cascading effect, right? Like even things like if I ask Nathan to be my coach, like what should I approach him with? Like I assume like there's also a little bit of like expectation setting in terms of like sometimes you have to give people the hard truth, right? And sometimes it's also hard for people to take that feedback.
Right. First steps are really just, if you're going to come to me, we need to set goals, even if it sounds, kind of tedious to go through this process with your coach. And I'm happy to have you try to establish those goals outside of our session time so we can have a full session of interacting. But that's step one. I need to know what you're looking to get out of this. And then I need to know your experience and I need to hear you thinking about Magic. And so I'll have, I have 15 different questions that are just floating around in my head. Like, here are things that I need to do checks on and think about. And sometimes you get a player and you're like, okay, like we can skip these steps. Like I see where you're at, but it's really trial and error in how you approach these things. And it's like really not like a one size fits all approach as well. I've had very good experiences trying different methods, but it takes some time because, yeah, understanding how other people think about Magic is kind of one of the things I try to focus on when I'm playing against people. And so doing
Right.
the same when you're trying to help people can be similarly like, a challenge, but really rewarding when it clicks.
How do you evaluate yourself as a coach, like versus a year ago? Because you had mentioned that you've been doing it for a while, and I think there's probably some qualifiable, if that's a word, like you can qualify that you're getting better. But how do you know that you're getting better as a coach? Like, are there certain heuristics that you apply to yourself?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, for one, at the end of a session, when you feel like you've made, given your coach or your client rather, really tangible goals that they can work on, that's step one. I try to make sure that I don't think I was doing this fully at first, but I really try to give feedback that's actionable to help people improve on their own time. And so that's the big thing I think I've gotten a lot better at. When you're in a session, it can feel like, oh, like maybe I wasted this person's time, or vice versa from either side. That's a feeling that could definitely arise, and that has happened for sure. So goal number one is making sure it feels worthwhile, because you're giving them tangible work and you're helping them to bounce ideas around. Step two is you have to be willing to help them identify weaknesses. And this is a big thing. Like I really focus on trying to let them improve from their losses and their wins, and looking back at games. And so bringing them down that same trajectory is something that I think it's almost universally applicable for Magic. I don't think anyone does it quite enough. And I would say my highlight from doing that is feeling like, when it clicks from both sides, and I see this aha moment from this person when they recognize that this exercise is doing wonders and they can repeat it, that's when I'm like, okay, I've succeeded as a coach. And yeah, I mean, that's the last thing. Like I have a set of exercises. Before it was really just, well, what can I do to help this person in my own head? Now it's like I have ways of addressing problems that I can use for different situations as I see fit. And I think that these things can be iterated on and improved on. And so when I'm doing coaching sessions and I realize, oh, this thing didn't really work, I'm really trying to adjust the method that I share advice with. The main thing being that I think I do a good job at is I think I succeed at teaching people how to read what the opponent is doing and why they're making plays, and basically just gathering information. Information gathering is something that is very practicable, and so I focused a lot of energy on that.
Right. Even small things, right? Like, why did they tap their mana that way, or like, what are they representing? I mean, this is all basic stuff, but
Yeah.
sometimes players need to have that reinforcement, or maybe like you said, a big thing in Magic is to know what to focus on. So it's like at any certain point you could focus on like a million things, but what are the things that actually matter right now, right?
Yeah, what matters.
Yeah, and that contextually changes too, like from turn to turn or from like play to play. So it's very cerebral. Yeah,
Totally.
yeah. So you mentioned like having a superpower, which is like like the 2 or 3 pivotal moments in a game that make or break the game or the match or whatever it is, right? So how did you develop that? Is it like intuition? Is it practice? Like, what is it?
Good question. I mean, I would say that is just a lot of studying, and mostly for me, that's like looking back at a game and trying to say like, okay, if I go turn by turn and I see what both players were thinking, what was going on? And so that was just a lot of my training, like looking at games and trying to understand what was going on. I think I particularly excelled at that skill, and I treat it as like something that is one of my best strengths, because I've just spent so much time looking at board states and trying to figure out why this thing would matter. I don't really have too much in the way of like, well, this one thing brought me to having this skill. It was just where I put my energy into was improving at this one thing. And I found a lot of ways of doing so when I started looking back at my games and when I started to try to look at other pro players' games and figure out if I would do something similar or why they did something different. And that's where the studying of Magic versus the playing of Magic kind of diverges. It would be like, yeah, I mean, there's just so many moments where you'd rather be playing a game, but you're way better off served trying to learn from others' games or your own games if you develop good studying habits.
Okay, this is not meant to be asking you for a hot take, but I'm going to go ahead and try. Like, what's your feeling about nature versus nurture when it comes to Magic players? Are Magic players just mostly born Magic players and just do like small refinements, or can someone like just be born like without having a good affinity for Magic and just through hard work just become like the next Nathan Steuer or Jerry Thompson or whoever?
I mean, unfortunately, there's probably a cap that's, I don't know if it's correlated with, I don't know, it feels bad to say, like, there's probably some, like, intelligence correlated cap in Magic that, like, comes at the cost of, like, in order to think in these certain ways, you have to develop these pattern recognition type approaches, and so not everyone's brain is going to work in that way. But I think for the mid-level grinders that want to level up, there's so much potential, and the best players have such a small understanding compared to what's possible that I think almost anyone who falls into that category can get to the top of the game or reach it. I mean, I spent years and years when I was younger, 14 through 17 at this lower level in Magic where I was still grinding and trying to get better in PTQs and Grand Prix type events. But for me, I feel like this nature versus nurture thing all comes down to like, there's a lot of potential in Magic, and even the best players in the game have so much that they need to do. There's a lot of points in Magic where I'm like, whoa, like I actually have no idea without spending like an insane amount of time thinking about this, what to do. I don't have time to do that. I have to settle for a different play. And so I recognize that there's such an unbounded potential in Magic, and I think that most people are not even close to their cap. Yeah.
Do you think Magic is a young person's game? Because it seems like to actually, or I guess the assumption being if you want to be the best that you can be in a competitive sense, you have to dedicate your time and effectively be all in on it in many respects, right? Because we see a lot of like Hall of Famers who are now have regular jobs and they come back and play, and it's like there's a lot of like what you get out of it is what you put into it. So what are your thoughts on that? Is it just a young person's game? Like you just basically have to have a point in your life where you're just dedicating yourself wholly to the craft, or what is it?
I mean, the Magic landscape changes so frequently in terms of what's important and what to prioritize, not just like in how you play, but like in the options that you have. And there's so many new interactions that are developed as part of what keeps Magic fresh and interesting to me, and I'm sure a lot of others. And so I think, well, yes, being young and devoted to Magic and having a really fresh brain that's used to these ideas is probably the place where you're going to maximize your capacity. Similar to what you said, I think when you get older, and if you have experience playing Magic, there's a lot of ways of diving back into it that you're going to be successful at. Even with these Hall of Famers, I think their repertoire in Magic when they were younger is incredible. But they're not putting in the same level of studying, and they don't care enough. And so they've plateaued. That's a big thing that I think I've always kept in mind, where like you can definitely plateau at any level, and you can even get worse at Magic very easily. And so, yeah, I'm not sure. It's a long-winded way of saying I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's probably a flawed question anyway. But but speaking of caring about Magic, right? What's your relationship with Magic now? Because you kind of touched on in the beginning being like it's a profession. You treat it pretty seriously. You're a coach. You're a player. You're a world champion now. So like, what yeah, what's your relationship with, without overcomplicating, what's your relationship with the game? How would you describe that?
I would say Magic is a job and sometimes a hobby, depending on who I'm playing it with and who I'm thinking about it with. But it is where a lot of my friends and I converge, and it's a place where I care about a lot of what's going on. And I think that Magic will always have a place for me. But as I've gotten this incredible accomplishment, and I'm feeling like I'm moving in this direction of mentoring other people in Magic, I realize that there's a lot of opportunities for me to explore outside of Magic that I can do. And so that's a big thing that I'm focusing my energy on now, which is how can I keep progressing myself and my well-being and prioritize things that I think are important in the long run.
Do you think that Magic encroaches on your sense of well-being when it comes to like any sort of negative effects?
I think that being fully devoted to Magic can lead to a lot of unhealthy attributes in your lifestyle. And so a lot of the top players in Magic will inevitably have their focus placed in a few big events, and that's perfectly acceptable. But the level that I approached Magic requires a lot of depth in terms of time to grind these tournaments, devotion to learning every single strategy in the game and interactions, and trying to at least have an understanding of how to utilize them. And I would say my brain isn't really wired in a way where I could take that slight step back so effectively. And so it kind of has to be like, I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to continue playing tournaments that I want to play. And I'll play these high-level pro tours and world championships that I really want to do. And I'll travel to hang out with my friends and enjoy the experiences. But I have other things that I'd like to accomplish, and that feels good.
So it sounds like you are a Magic player, but you don't want to be defined as, I just do Magic.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it.
Is it, I guess the devil's advocate argument is like, there are people who, myself included, who are twice your age and will never reach the heights that you have reached. So it's like, I guess in some sense, maybe it's part of being young. I mean, I hate to overgeneralize, but it's like you don't want to be pigeonholed, right? But there's also something nice about it as you get older, which is like, sometimes just being known for one or two things is actually quite significant. And some people never reach that mountain. So I'm wondering if you think about that, because you seem like someone who does think about like the flip side of things. So it's like, has that ever crossed your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm pretty comfortable.
I guess then we're talking about the ego part of Magic too, in some ways, right? So
yeah, well, not delving into that category so significantly, I would say I think of my relationship and my myself in Magic as just like this is something that I've always dreamed of being at the highest ranks of. It's something that I love representing, and I will continue to feel that way for the foreseeable future. And there's so many aspects to Magic that I want to explore, and whether that continues to be just being a high-level tournament grinder versus approaching it in other ways that let me manage my time differently. I think it is something that will continue being a presence in my life, and hopefully something that I continue feeling fulfilled from. And I think the recognition has also been really nice. It's just like I would consider myself pretty humble in certain respects, but like playing Magic certainly feels like, wow, like I have this recognition from doing well in tournaments, and that is really inspiring to keep going on. But I no longer feel like that's a central motivator for me. I feel like I'm just going to use that platform to explore these other ideas that have been floating in my head.
Yeah. Magic on your own terms. That's definitely the healthiest from the hundreds of people I've spoken to, and thinking about my own situation. I'm guessing coaching can also be like generalizable to other disciplines, right? Because like these are, it feels like a very transferable skill to me, like hearing how you describe it.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I've also had a lot of experience getting coached in recent times. I hired a personal trainer to help me with fitness a few months ago, and that's been a really inspiring and good experience for my physical health, and also just feeling like, okay, like I understand when I'm talking to this guy, like what coaching techniques he's using that are clicking with me and some that aren't, and I can give good feedback as I'm a coach as well. I understand how like related these things are. I'm seeking a writing coach to help me with, some of the struggles I've had getting my ideas out there. And I feel like going into that process, I'm feeling pretty good with the idea that I know what type of feedback I need because I've given feedback for other areas of expertise, and I believe that there's a lot of helpful heuristics from coaching that transfer. Yeah.
When it comes to writing, do you also have goals in mind when you're looking for a coach, or maybe just even working on the craft yourself?
Yeah, good question. For me, I think it's really important. I mean, I think I'm trying to put less weight on this idea, but the people who I've been most interested in receiving writing coaching from are people whose ideas and written work I respect a lot. And it's, I'm sure, similar in a lot of respects. You know, you respect a trainer who has some accolades and who can back up their work, and you respect, a Magic player who can share their ideas.
Yeah, I want to get coaching
also,
from the world champion. Or yeah.
But the same thing applies to me where I don't care how popular this guy is. If I feel like this person's writing and their sense of style clicks with me, that's my goal going in, to have that idea be shared with me and to build that connection.
Are you looking for any kinds of tangible output? Like maybe Nathan writes a book, or you want to have a weekly habit? I know you've recently asked people online about just people's thoughts, but like, what are your thoughts about it right now?
So the end goal, and I have no timeline set for it, but at some point in my life, I'm really interested in writing a book, a nonfiction book, kind of exploring my own interests and curiosities, and sort of dealing with like managing, school and being pulled in different directions. And I don't know, the topic will kind of come and click at a certain time, I'm sure. But in the short term, I think for me, it's just producing output and putting it out there that I'm trying to focus on. And so I have a lot of writing, and I've spent a lot of time doing writing, and the ideas are a little intimidating to share, and they feel unpolished, and they feel like I could write this if it were just for myself, just fine, but I'm writing for an audience, and so it's not fully my voice, and I have to get that under control. But that's kind of the big thing with a lot of these ideas. It's like, I think I just need someone or something to be like, here's how you manage these feelings in some ways that have worked for me. Why don't you try it and see what works for you? So that's kind of the stage I'm floating around at. And hopefully that clicks. I mean, if I could do an hour writing, someone suggested yesterday, a day, which sounds pretty reasonable to me, I think I'd feel very fulfilled. And then if I could release something, maybe for now once a month, I think that would feel like a very doable goal that I could commit to. For me, it's really about just creating these practices that I am acting on, and that are, maybe I say like, if I don't put out something once a month, here's some self-inflicted punishment of some kind that, or some reward for doing so, some incentive, basically. So I'm just thinking of creative ways of keeping myself accountable, basically.
I think one of the ways that I've experimented with, which works really well, is just like tell a friend that you're doing it, and then that's a way of accountable. I'm not saying like blast it into public, but like if you just tell a friend like, here's $5, like return it to me if I do this, otherwise keep it. Like even like small psychological things like that, they help a lot. Like just telling somebody that you trust, like, okay, I'm gonna try to do this every month or every week, hold me accountable, or I'm gonna quit like this unhealthy habit. Just I'm telling you about it, hold me accountable. Like it really works. Like that psychological social thing just somehow is magical. So
yeah. I have seen systems like that before, and I think that would be a good idea. Really good idea.
Yeah. And now that you've had the whole year, and it's been there's been a little bit of time, like a little bit of distance between like now and winning the world champs. How are you feeling about everything, like about being the world champion and all that? I'm sure it feels different from like the very moment you won the tournament. So how, like now you have a little bit of time to look back on it. Like, how do you feel about it?
I think I feel okay. it's so complicated because it's such like a mixed feeling, and there's so much going on internally. But looking back at it, I think I feel like this one sense of relief, which sounds crazy. Like, this is something that I would have fought to try to succeed at for the rest of my life. And now I can move in some directions that are best suited for me. And then some sense of like, I really found my purpose in trying to meet this accomplishment, and I got there. And that gives me this sense of like, anything that I set my mind to and focus my energy on, I'm capable of putting my best effort and trying to make happen. And I think that's really strong because for me, it hasn't always felt that way. Like I kind of shared earlier in our podcast with like, struggling with this transition. And I think it's really reaffirming to feel like I have this ability to execute on the things that I set my mind to, and I have to create situations where I can succeed. And, the event itself is still very blurry for me, even though it was a little over a month ago. It was kind of a cerebral experience almost, where I'm like trying to remember, and I remember bits and pieces of interactions and things going on. But it's one of the first times I've played Magic, and I felt like I don't really know like what happened in my games looking back at it a month ago. Like maybe if I tried really hard, but I think there was some sixth sense that really kicked into gear during this tournament that wasn't present previously. And it worked out, but it was a very different experience. And I guess the last thing is like holding this title is super significant for me. And, I have a year where I'm the world champion, and that feels to me like one of the biggest wins I can get. I'm going to give you on a Magic card, and it's like the physical accomplishments of these things are something that I'll be able to remember for forever. And that's super significant. And I don't know, it's really emotional for me.
Yeah. So the blurry part, like, you just felt like you were in the zone? Like, were you just like in a flow state or something, like the whole tournament?
Yes. Or? I think that is exactly how I felt. I was just in this flow state. I think the exact thing I said to a friend was when I was in the finals, I think I dissociated at multiple points, and I couldn't see anything around me. There was so much stress and anxiety going on in my body. The only thing I could feel was just like, I have the screen in front of me. Like I need to like lock in on this. This is like my whole world. And so my brain and everything just kind of converged and was pointing in this one direction. And that experience felt like it really helped me and made sure that I could give my full energy. And also it's just not a state that you can get into easily. So that was a really interesting experience.
Yeah. I think the great thing about all accomplishments that we're proud of, which this one definitely is for you, is that it might not be so easy to just pull it out again, to like replicate the flow state, but just having that sort of, it's almost like your body, whether it's like mentally or even physically, has gone through it. So it's like, that gives you a lot of confidence in the future, no matter what you do, even when you're not playing Magic, when you're just like dealing with like a very high stakes situation, whatever it is, like life or career. It's like, you can always fall back on that, or like lean back on like, I had some muscle memory of the time that I was able to like be the master of myself. And I think that makes all the difference. So it's not so much like, oh, can I win worlds every year? Obviously that's very difficult or impossible, but it's like, or can I win every Magic tournament? But it's like, just having that experience just means like a ton, right?
Totally. 100%.
Yeah, Nathan, man, it was great talking to you. And what's the best place for people to reach out to you or to find you, where you would like to be found on the internet?
First of all, thank you so much for hosting me. In regards to like our conversation here, I really felt like you asked amazing questions that were super insightful, and this was a really, really sweet interview for me to be a part of. So thank you for that. If you want to find me,
you're very welcome.
Media,
it's easy because it's you. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. And that takes a lot of work. To set yourself up and ask podcast questions like this. that was really meaningful to me. So thank you. The best places to find me are on Twitter at Nathan Steuer1 is my Twitter handle. And if you would like to book a coaching session with me, you can either check my bio in Twitter, or you can find me at medify.com/Nathan Steuer1 as well. So those are the two main places to find me. And feel free to reach out.
Nathan, it's a pleasure. I definitely a huge pleasure, huge privilege having the chance to talk to you. Definitely the youngest world champion I've ever talked to. I feel like you've got a lot of amazing stuff in front of you that are going to happen for you in the future. And thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much, James. I really appreciate it.